realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. And oh, how he loves us all. Oh, how he loves us. How he loves us. He is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. Yeah, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. And we are his portion, and he is our prize, drawn to redemption by the grace in his eyes. If grace is an ocean, we're all sinking, and heaven meets us like an unforeseen kiss, and my heart turns finally inside of my chest. And I don't have time to maintain these regrets when I think about the way how he loves us so. Oh, how he loves us. How he loves us.
I titled the message this week, the title kept moving, by the way. I called it The Corner of Darkness and Light Avenue. The title will become more apparent. Why the title was chosen will become more apparent as we move to the end of the message. But I want us to start us thinking about that. Remember when your child or grandchild would try to go sleep in their room, but then they would lay their head on the bed, and suddenly there might be a monster under that bed, and they hear that monster, and so finally what would they do? You'd hear there maybe a very loud voice come from the. Everyone's seen a child like this. I mean, they go to lay in the bed and you think, oh, we got it. They're going to make it through the night. And suddenly you hear this loud voice come from the room, Mama! Or you hear the pattering of little feet coming into your room, with a little whimper, whether it be the parent's room or a sibling's room. And then there is that moment in the child's life, right? The moment in the child's life when they sleep all night in their bed. And they sit at breakfast and they say, I'm not scared anymore. Scared. How do they say that? Scared? I'm not scared anymore of the monsters under my bed. And we all celebrate that child's growth in that moment. I bring the image of that child overcoming their fear, because so many of us are still living scared that there might be monsters under our bed. We see it in the way that we live our lives that creates so many problems, whether it be in our lives, in our culture, in our world, how fear seems to dictate us. And in these recent years in our politics, a fear that says there's some imaginary monster out there who wants to take us out. And on this day, we call Transfiguration Sunday, the last Sunday of Epiphany, is a day that we celebrate that there is a light of God in this world that gives us no reason to be scared that there might be a monster under the bed. We call this Transfiguration Sunday. Stephanie spoke to the children of the traditional gospel passage that is read for this day of Jesus up on the mountaintop with his inner circle of those 3 disciples. And then these appearances or semblances of Moses and Elijah that appear, reaffirming the whole reason for this experience was to say to them in that inner circle that the light of God is in this one called the Christ, the Messiah. And there is no mistake about it. It's not happenstance that we read about the light, Jesus being the light of God in the world on the Sunday before we enter into the journey of the Lenten darkness. Had you ever put that together? Because as we walk our way through the next 6 weeks examining those things that we could cast away, that keep us held back, that keep us in the dark, we carry with us into that the light, the reminder, and we're buoyed by that there's a light in this world that no darkness can overcome. For the antidote of fear is to let the light shine in and around us into the darkness. And so the text that I chose to read today is at Isaiah 6th chapter, oftentimes read on this Transfiguration Sunday. It's a text that speaks of another very dark time in the life of the people of God. The context is this. King Uzziah, as you saw, has just passed away. Do you remember why he had died? He had passed away because he had burst into the temple and he had cast aside the priest and he had begun to handle the holy things himself. And as a result, if you go back and look at his story, and you go back, as a result of that, he was afflicted with a leprosy. A leprosy, as we know, that would cast him out beyond the city gates and the walls, and he was no longer the king. Now, King Uzziah was a great king for Israel, a great king who had done many things, who had made the people confident of their future, and now he's gone. And it's a dark time in this country's life, in the people of God's life. And so, here is Isaiah in the temple, just going through his motions, just going through the motions of spreading the incense around, saying the prayers in the Holy of Holies or near the Holy of Holies, tending to the burning bulls on the altar, hoping that somehow the scent and the fragrance of that which he offered would cause the one God to offer mercy and forgiveness and restore the people's confidence that God is a light into this world. That's the context. Now, the God that Isaiah was looking to enter back in during this dark period, is so different than the many gods of culture and across the world that get into our lives, unfortunately, in wrong ways. You have to go back and do some study of the ancient gods. Have you really read? How about we'll use the Druids this morning, the Druids of Ireland, and you go back and read the nature of their gods. I can just tell you one. There was one of the Druids were always, what the Druids really believed about their gods? Their gods were out to trick them. They were like tricksters. But what if we did this to the people? They would do that. It's an interesting way of faith. One of their goddesses, I should say, the Morrigan, in one scene, takes 2 other, you might call them sub-gods, Conchet and Utsler, and Corrigan describes to them predicts to them what's about to happen to the people of Ireland. And she speaks in gory detail of how the gods are going to destroy the people of Ireland. And Conchet and Ursula it says in the story, it says, pull all the men of Ireland together. It tells them what's about to happen, what the gods are about to do to us. And it's one of the interesting twists in the story is, it says, upon being told of what was about to happen, 100 men died of fright, of fear. The story ends in this way. It was a bad night for them. My friends, we've had too many bad nights in recent years as pastors and people, and even on these current days, continue to stir up fears that we somehow have a fickle God who makes this world an unreliable place. And these mythological descriptions that we hear in all places and in so many ways come from high pulpits. They're taught in the smallest classroom in churches, and they speak of a frightful fate for humanity that will somehow all be subjected to this God who's out to get us. It has no likeness to the Judeo-Christian God, the deity who acts primarily and first out of redemptive love. And religion historically, unfortunately, has functioned in this way to use a God of fear as a way to control the people. And it still holds sway today. We need to unlearn some things that we think we know about God, what we know about this world, what we know about religion. I wish we could recapture the word religion. Some of you heard me say before, it's such a simple word. It means to relegate, to connect us to each other and to God. And let us remember that the God that we look to is not the one that speak of by the ancients, but it is the most ancient God. It was a God of creation who cast the first light into the world, into the chaos, and into the darkness. And he cast that light and has spent the rest of the days in relationship to the people, loving them back into the fold, saying, look at the light. The story we read today is a story of that one that moves from fear and to faith because the light of God leads them there. When the light of God does show up in the midst of our fears, in the midst of our darkness, it does begin to transform us. We experience a transformation. Isaiah feels a sense of unworthiness. He says before God, he acknowledges his unfitness before God. What does he say back in the text? He says, woe is me. I'm a man of unclean lips around unclean people. That's a very common feeling in the human condition. Once the light of God shows us our wandering ways, we see what we have how we've gone astray. And while that light is intended to redirect us back to God, some people use that light of God to continue to hold people down in fear and to say to them, look how bad you are. You're not just doing wrong things. You are a person who is wrong. And there, all the practices of self-harm continue to grow in our lives because the light of God is not used to show that we can be changed, but to simply show that we are held back. Well, that isn't what happened in the story at all, does it? When this glorious light of God happens to Isaiah there in the temple, God says, you're not damaged goods at all. God sends this six-winged angel, seraphim. And what happened there, the metaphor is that he took the residue of perhaps the ashes or the burning of the offering and placed it on his lips to clean away any of the gloom and doom that Isaiah felt about his present circumstance and the future. It's a wonderful metaphor that says God will remove anything in our lives that keeps us despondent, that keeps us depressed, that keeps us from feeling useful to being a part of God's redemptive ways. God will not allow any of our imperfections to keep us from cooperating in God's intentions. For the grand creator of all humanity is also the lavish lover of your soul, my friends. God wants a loving relationship with you. And that's why the light comes to break into our darkness, to transform us so we do not fear any longer. You can tell stories how that's happened to you, I hope. How the light of God extinguished the fear and the darkness in your life. It may happen in an unexpected way. It can happen in multiple ways. It may come to you with a whisper of a wind. Oh, I hear and see the light of God. It may come when the sea roars like a roaring sea. It lightens the dark night of our souls. And with whatever way God comes to us, we are changed by that light. Because we know there's nothing we fear. Now, that transformation is followed by a liberation. God's light offers more than clarity for the present moment, but a purpose for our future. We read at the end of the text what? God asked, but by the way, whom shall I send now? I wonder if Isaiah would, here I am, Lord. No, he probably didn't know that song. But he knows the words. He says, here I am. Send me. Look what happened. Isaiah moved from, woe is me, to here I am. Send me, my friends. The light of God has been moving humanity through that progression from the beginning of time. If you will read your scriptures closely, that is what that book is about. It's about the light of God breaking in us to change our lives and to not just transform us, but to liberate us to be who we are, children of the light living in the world. Woe is me, to here I am, send me. I'm looking for an illustration and to kind of speak to this today. And you can't help go wrong with Fred Craddock. Now, you have to be kind of an old-time Methodist to know who Dr. Fred Craddock was. One of the great preachers of the 20th century, professor of hermeneutics at Emory. And so I go back. My illustration may be dated in its occurrence, but it's as relative as it is, relevant as it is for this 21st century. He talks about a time when he went to do a lecture in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He arrives on a Saturday to do the lecture at the church, and it could happen, as you might imagine, in Winnipeg. A snowstorm fell like no other and covered the ground. And he says, I got a call the next morning, and the people at the church said, there's no way that we can get to you. There's no way anybody can get to the church. I'm sorry, the lectures are canceled, and we won't be. There's nothing we can do at this point. However, the man said there is a coffee shop about a block away from you. If you want to get something to eat, you probably can get out, at least get some nourishment. It's down at the bus depot. And Craddock said he bundles up and he heads out for breakfast. He walked in. He said the place was packed. After he entered, a few persons scooted down to make room for him. And soon after he had entered, the door opened again, and the rough owner said, close the door, you're letting the heat out. The woman sheepishly made her way in, and the people again scooted down to make room for her. A man, he says, in a greasy apron, came up and says to her, what do you want? May I have water, please? He brings her water. She says, what else you want? She says, water's fine. He says, no, I want to know, what do you want to eat? She says, water will be okay. The gruff man said, lady, we have paying customers here. What do you want to order? She sheepishly says, nothing. Craddock figured, I figured she didn't have the money to pay. Well, if you don't order, you can't stay, he says. And she says, "Can I just stay long enough to get warm?" The man growls, "Order something or leave." And the woman gets up to leave. As she got up, the people on each side of her rose too, and they started to follow her out. As those three entered, the people on each side of them rose, and they began to follow her out. And little by little, as the people, everybody in the diner rose, and were going to follow her out of the restaurant. The owner says, "Whoa, everybody sit down." The whole clientele was ready to leave. She can stay. She can stay. It's okay. And he even brought her a bowl of soup. Craddock asked the man next to him, "Who is she? Is somebody y'all all know?" He goes, "No, we've never seen her in our life. But if she ain't welcome here, we ain't welcome here," he said. Craddock says, "I finished my soup that morning. And I had this warm feeling inside of me that was more than just warm broth in my stomach." He witnessed how he says he reflected how he had witnessed the transformation, using our language today, and liberation, because there were people in that diner willing to stand up and say, "We will be the light of God for the sake of this woman." He said he walked back out and looked into the windows, and he says he saw all those people there. And that woman sitting there among them. And he wondered, if she experienced the love of God through that light those people showed, what might she do next? How might she continue to be the child of God she was made to be, a child to walk and reflect the light? It is necessary, and it is hard work, my friends, for the church and you and I to bear the light of God into this dark world. There is much around us where people are saying, "Woe is me." Who of us will say, "Lord, here I am, send me"? And our voices will sound like that heavenly voice. Who is willing to say, "Here I am, send me"? And we will consistently, in every moment of our life, think, how can I shine the light of God into this dark world? Until more people say, "Here am I, send me." And may that be true in the precincts of PFUMC, that more of us are transformed and liberated to be children who will walk into this light of this dark world. That's what I know happens on the corner of Darkness and Light Avenue. May you, the people of God, hear the word of God for you on this day. Amen.